Yo, yo, yo. So, lately I've been thinking about quite a bit about gray witches and how someone might come to terms or figure out that they indeed might be one, and what could be or are some of the traits that this gray witch, male or female, type of person might have. And sort of like very everyday traits, I would say, that you might discover you have. Let's see where this goes. I'm just gonna mention few that I've definitely picked up on and noticed. I'm gonna start by saying that a gray witch usually is someone who embraces the duality of life completely. So a gray witch would see the world in a very sort of a level, even playing field type of way. So everything is connected and tied together. And as far as the duality goes, so you basically, in other words, you embrace the light and the dark sides. Or for you, perhaps there is not even that much of a difference between those two. And perhaps, the way you can recognize this in yourself would be that you equally enjoy and find beauty, strength, and wisdom in, let's say, sad feelings or sorrow or even death, sort of like melancholy, like you see melancholy as something quite beautiful. And so you could find that you love perhaps Gothic churches, like that type of architecture might be your jazz, as much as you might love like English countryside and Pride and Prejudice and Doves and stuff like that. So those both to you are beautiful and something to learn from, for sure. So that embracing of the duality in life is something you love. You might love cemeteries. You might find them very beautiful and peaceful. And you might be someone who may be perceived sometimes as being not sad, but kind of like, well, a little gray, like a little somber, or because you might spend a lot of time in your head, inside of your head, thinking and just sort of like taking in the world. So you might be somebody who often hears maybe like line up, like, or you might be someone very serious in nature, but actually that sort of like, that is kind of maybe a misunderstood fact about gray witches, that they are serious in nature, which actually a gray witch usually sees the world as quite comical. But you see, a gray witch would sometimes act a little, perhaps like not overly enthusiastic in nature, because they've been here before. So a gray witch would be definitely someone with an old soul. So if you are a magical witchy type, chances are you are an old soul anyway. But a gray witch has like this connection, like he or she, a gray witch remembers that he's been or they've been here before, and they're very connected with that. And so another thing might be that you are very connected to ancestors and you love to work with ancestors, and if you are like a practicing witch or some type of magical person, or you're not, but you're just perhaps very, you may remember like people that have passed away, or you're very interested in your family history and your family lineage, is something that you might ask a lot of questions about, perhaps from your mom and dad. That's always been very intriguing to you. And that's another thing. I would say that a gray witch respects and is interested about history. So if history and like different world wars and phenomena and rises and falls of empires and stuff like that has always been your jam, I would say that that's definitely a trait that a gray witch has, because they respect history a lot. They understand that it's very connected to the now, to the future. Which kind of perhaps leads to the next trade, which would be that sounded like I said trade, but I said trade. So a gray witch might have very strong visions of the future. So you might be somebody with very high levels of clairvoyance or sentient or clair knowing, or you get the gist, etc., etc. So you are very intuitive in that way, because you are connected with time. You sort of see that time is not linear, like it's sort of time is this continuum of different doorways to different possibilities in a way, or that sort of like everything that has happened has already, or everything that is happening has already happened. The time concept, that's another topic entirely, but definitely that time is something you see it sort of I guess differently, which may perhaps lead you not taking time seriously, which could showcase in you kind of being late perhaps a lot, like kind of like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, where he says that a wizard is never late, nor is he on time. He arrives precisely when he means to, or something like that. And that's a very grey witchy thing to say. Very grey witchy thing to say, and that's perhaps another thing, Gandalf being the goat of grey witches, so you might always loved Gandalf or felt some sort of kindred spirit with him. And there's quite, I think, quite many funny anecdotes that Gandalf says that are very grey witchy, or the way he behaves. For example, a grey witch would be usually someone that is a little bit of a scatterbrain. You see, because a grey witch is an old soul, it then leads to you having this like billions of years of different information from different places and times, and also I feel like a grey witch is somebody who absorbs information really easily, but you don't write things down, which is very very contradictory in nature, which a grey witch might be. Very contradictory character. Like I said, there's the light and the dark, the yin and the yang. So you might often even contradict yourself, like you're just like sort of that might happen to you sometimes. But so where was I? So yeah, so you might be somebody who absorbs information very easily. So let's say, for instance, there could be like, you could be chilling in a coffee house and there's a TV or a radio that's on, and you are not really even listening to that radio or watching that TV, but let's say there's a conversation about global warming or something, and then skip to another instance, you're somewhere else. Now you hear people are perhaps having like a conversation about global warming, and you're involved in that conversation, and based on what you heard on the radio, even though you weren't listening, you can kind of join in to that conversation and sort of like take these bits of information and sort of use them in the time at hand, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like that scene in Matrix where Neo is like, I know Kung Fu. So like in Matrix, they sort of tap into these, well, kind of like Akashic records, I think, but this sort of knowledge that the world has, you know, recorded, that sort of this collective subconscious of all of us, and it's just a vault of information, and you can access that. So I think that is a very strong trait that you might have, and it can also almost feel like, especially if you are just maybe discovering your magical attributes and abilities, and or, you know, things like that, it might feel almost like a little bit like ADD-ish, sort of like you are bombarded by information. You might have a very active mind, so definitely perhaps sleeping is something you're not, you know, a big champion of. So you might have a little bit of a nocturnal, well, yeah, you might be a little bit insomniac in ways. So, and that perhaps also is why sometimes, well, I feel grey witches are quite solitary. So a grey witch usually is not somebody who has like a coven, but they're definitely more solitary people, and that being one of the reasons because they kind of have to find that zen every now and then. So you probably value your personal time a lot, and and this is another sort of strange perhaps trait that is not that commonly perhaps written, but I feel like gray witches are very strong empaths, for sure, because they are very in tune with other people's feelings, and they see your true self. Like, they're very good at that, and they're very good at recognizing people's abilities and desires and loves and needs and fears and like strong traits. So you might be somebody who encourages people that might not have confidence or don't see themselves fully. So you might be somebody who sort of perhaps lifts them up and points out that, hey, you have this thing, like you have this talent, you're amazing at this, or this thing comes very naturally, to you, so you should develop this, and so on. But definitely a scatterbrain. So you might be somebody with a bad memory, and you, like I said, perhaps don't like to write things down, which I think all gray witches should perhaps start doing more, because that will definitely ultimately help you hone in your abilities more, and so on, obviously. But I mean, gray witches are pretty independent, so you're not gonna listen to me anyway in this subject matter, and you prefer in ways to keep that information inside of your head. That might go back, to sort of keeping sacred information secret. So I feel that might be like goes back to gray witches being very connected to past and ancestors and sacred, like old historic knowledge. So maybe that's one subconscious reason, or then, who knows. But like a good example for that scatterbrainness, I would say, would be when well, again, the goat of gray witches, Gandalf, when they reads the Mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings, and first he cannot remember how to get in the mines. Obviously, then they get in, speak friend, and enter. But then they get like on top of the mines, inside of the mines, but there's a staircase, and they get on top of the staircase, and there's 3 doors, and Gandalf says, I have no memory of this place, and he stays there and sits there, and the fellowship is just waiting Gandalf to remember, to remember where to go. And in that time, in that same scene, actually, there's another trait that sort of comes to the forefront, which is, like I said, like a gray witch is somebody, like I was talking about the time, so they don't like to hurry, because they feel kind of like they believe in divine timing. So like, and it goes back to that being sort of that strong visions of the future, because Gandalf knows that there may be a reason why they have to sort of stay there for a while, like everything happens, for a reason. So, and then they had that conversation about Gollum with Frodo, because then Frodo comes to sit next to Gandalf as Gandalf is thinking, and they see, down the stairs they see that Gollum is there, like lurking, and Gandalf obviously knew that Gollum has been following them. This is gonna be crazy if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings, but you should. So, and then they have that conversation where where Frodo says, it's a pity that Bilbo didn't kill Gollum. And then, Gandalf has a conversation with Frodo about pity and how you should not pity people and everything happens for a reason, and about divine timing, basically. They are having a conversation about divine timing. But anyway, so that would be an example of that. And now I must say that I feel as so that Grey Witches are extremely close, if not kind of the same, if I should put that out there, with head witches. So I find those two to be pretty close, and also I see a close relation between Grey Witches and mystics. So you might be somebody who, like a mystic, sort of is a little bit of a riddler, kind of like a politician type. A person, you might hear that a lot, that you should be a politician or something, and you might answer things kind of like roundaboutly, if you understand what I mean. And you have that sort of way of challenging people with your questions, because you're very interested in how people's sort of mind works. So you might ask a lot of like questions about other people, sort of like challenge them in that way, if you know what I mean. You also probably might be somebody with a very sarcastic, sort of dry and dark sense of humor. So yeah, I think that's a random fact, but I think that that's something that goes back to sort of embracing that sort of dark side of life. And you see it because like I said, I think Grey Witches sort of see the world often as very comical. So you might have like a strong affinity to sarcasm and dark and twisted humor, for sure. And that might lead to, and again, being sort of misunderstood as maybe somebody who's harsh or blunt or serious, but actually people can't sometimes tell, are you joking or not? Because you might alternate between like super serious and quiet to being quite the extrovert, and be a little bit like provocative, almost like a little like shocking, or in a way, if that makes sense. So that might confuse people at times, and you're actually probably somebody very playful, but you come across perhaps serious. So you might love perhaps like British humor, or shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or Arrested Development, some shows that just come to mind, but like kind of like dry and sarcastic things. Or there's so many, I don't know, those just came to mind. And what else? So definitely I would say those would be some traits. I would say that, well, few funny perhaps examples of a Grey Witch from things you can relate, like in films or TV. I would say also that Professor McGonagall from Harry Potter is a little grey witchy in nature. So that would be, and I would almost put Jagen from Game of Thrones in that category, although he is more like a mystic to me. But like I said, there's something very similar about mystics and grey witches to me. So, and I would also say that if you are a female identifying a female, then you might have masculine tendencies, or you might have heard that you have sort of a masculine vibe about you. And if you are then again male, you might be somebody with a very sort of harsh, intimidating exterior, almost like somebody who looks or presents themselves as almost like somebody who wears like a lot of black and like almost like a heavy metal or like a biker, type, but then on the inside you're like super sensitive, and you might enjoy things like ballet or like opera or like small kittens or something, as much as you enjoy perhaps listening to I don't know, Slayer or In Flames. No, what would be like a street credibility heavy metal band? Well, but heavy metal or some sort of like very intense music like that. And you might enjoy horror films and stuff like that, but then on the other side you could have like a sort of hidden passion for kittens and ballet, which is super cool. And yeah, what else should I... Oh, and I would also say that a grey witch probably, well, to me is very related also. So this is kind of like an all over the place, but very related to chaos witches, and you might be attracted to chaos magic for sure. And science, you're very interested in science, perhaps. Yeah, I would say that, and also I think that you like simple things in life. So you are practical and you love simple things with like a dose of luxury. So you might have like a one specific habit or luxury thing you like to indulge in, like maybe you like fine whiskey or designer handbags or shoes, but otherwise you're like super, like you don't need nothing and you just enjoy peace and a cup of coffee and a good cigarette or something and food and music. But yeah, that I would also say would be something to you. Now, perhaps a little advice for you grey witchy types that I would say or give a suggestion. Sorry guys, English is not my first language, so suggestion. I would suggest to you, I will refer to you this following advice, which will be that because of your strong empath abilities, I would definitely, sort of watch out not being too much of not a doormat, because you are probably somebody who has very high authority, like people sort of see you as very assertive person, but you have maybe this willingness to sacrifice very easily for the greater good, and that's something you should obviously, I mean, that's a noble and great trait to have, and that should be celebrated, but to an extent, obviously, because you have to love yourself, obviously. So kind of first, in a way. So that's something I would say. Now, I hope that some of these, perhaps, if you are in the path of discovering these sort of things about yourself, or you're just interested in otherwise in this type of world, here you go. And I must say oneness and namaste.